My son leaned back in his chair, smiling like he had just won something. He said proudly, almost casually, "My wife finally put her in her place. She shut her up for good." The room went quiet. My chest tightened. Because the woman he was talking about was me. And before I could even process that betrayal, my brother laughed and added something that changed everything. Something that revealed how long this had been happening behind my back. In that moment, I realized this was not disrespect. This was a coordinated attack. And they had no idea what they had just started. My name is Elaine Carter, and I was 58 years old when I finally understood that respect does not disappear all at once. It erodes quietly, piece by piece, word by word, smile by smile. And by the time you notice it is gone, everyone around you is already used to treating you like something that can be dismissed. I had always believed I earned my place in my family. I raised my son alone after his father walked out when he was 12. I worked double shifts at a regional insurance office for nearly 2 decades. I skipped vacations, postponed dreams, and convinced myself that exhaustion was just the cost of love. When my son Daniel grew into a confident, successful man, I thought the sacrifices had been worth it. I did not realize I was being written out of my own story. Daniel was 32 when he married Vanessa. She was beautiful in the polished way that never looked accidental. Perfect teeth, perfect posture. A voice that could soften when she wanted something and sharpen when she did not. She worked in marketing, loved curated dinners, and spoke often about boundaries, standards, and knowing your worth. At first, I admired her confidence. I thought it would be good for Daniel to have someone strong by his side. That was my first mistake. The shift was subtle, comments made with a laugh, correcting me in front of others. Small rules introduced without discussion. Vanessa would rearrange my kitchen when she visited, explaining that it flowed better this way. She would interrupt my stories to finish them faster, as if my words were an inconvenience. When I tried to speak privately to Daniel, he would smile gently and say, "Mom, she just likes things a certain way." That sentence became the foundation of everything that followed. I lived in the same house Daniel grew up in. A modest 2-bedroom place on a quiet street lined with old oak trees. The kind of neighborhood where people waved even if they did not know your name. Daniel and Vanessa lived 20 minutes away in a newly built development where every lawn looked identical and every driveway held a luxury car. I noticed how Vanessa always hesitated before sitting on my couch, as if it might stain her clothes. I noticed how Daniel no longer lingered after meals. What I did not notice at first was how often decisions were being made about me without me. My brother Mark lived nearby. He was 2 years older than me, charming, loud, and always eager to be included in anything that felt important. He had struggled financially most of his life and had a habit of aligning himself with whoever had the most influence in the room. When Daniel married Vanessa, Mark suddenly became a regular presence at their gatherings. They shared inside jokes. They exchanged glances. I told myself it was harmless. But then conversations would stop when I entered the room. Family dinners began to feel like performances where I did not know the script. Vanessa would ask pointed questions about my finances under the guise of concern. Daniel would nod along. Mark would laugh and make comments about downsizing eventually. I smiled through it all, because that is what women like me were taught to do. Smile, endure. Be grateful you are still invited. There were nights I lay awake replaying conversations, wondering if I was imagining the tension. Wondering if age had made me sensitive. Wondering when my own son stopped seeing me as someone worthy of respect and started seeing me as a problem to manage. The answer came faster than I expected. It happened during a Sunday dinner at my house, the kind of dinner I used to love. Roast chicken in the oven, the table set carefully, even though I was told not to go through the trouble. Mark was already there when Daniel and Vanessa arrived. Vanessa barely acknowledged the food. Daniel hugged me quickly. The energy in the room felt tight, controlled. At one point, I offered a suggestion about a holiday plan. Nothing demanding. It's just an idea. Vanessa smiled thinly and said, "We have already discussed that. It would not work." already discussed, without me. Daniel did not look at me. He stared at his plate. Mark cleared his throat like he was suppressing laughter. I felt something shift inside my chest then, a quiet warning. The kind that tells you something important is about to be taken from you, and you are the only one who does not know how. What I did not realize was that they were not just talking about plans. They were talking about control, and the real injustice had already been set in motion long before that dinner ever began. If you have ever been pushed aside, spoken over, or quietly betrayed by people you trusted, you are not alone. Stories like this are not about anger. They are about endurance, clarity, and what happens when someone finally stops explaining themselves. If that kind of story matters to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. What comes next is not loud, but it is deliberate, and it changes everything. From that Sunday dinner onward, every visit became a minefield. Vanessa did not hide her contempt anymore. It was subtle, but relentless. She would lean forward during conversations, eyes narrowing, voice soft but cutting. Every suggestion I made about family gatherings, about food, about even small decisions, was dismissed as old-fashioned or unnecessary. Daniel would nod politely, smiling like he agreed, but his silence felt like betrayal. And Mark began to act like a partner in her little scheme, laughing at jokes I did not understand and giving me the kind of glances that made me shrink inside. At first I told myself to let it slide. Maybe they were just figuring out new roles, I thought. Perhaps I was imagining things. But the pattern was undeniable. Vanessa would schedule visits when I was busy just to comment on my home, my cooking, my choices. She would rearrange things, not just in my kitchen, but in my living room, my bedroom. Nothing was sacred. And every change came with a comment that made me feel inferior. "I do not know why people keep these old things," she would say, pointing at my grandmother's china. Or, "It is better to have everything match. It just feels cleaner." Each word was like a needle, threading discomfort into my chest. Daniel never defended me. He would smile, sometimes even nod, as if her words were reasonable. Sometimes he would add, quietly, "Mom, she is just trying to help." That phrase became unbearable. Just trying to help. It sounded harmless, but it felt like a dismissal of my existence. I began to notice the subtle ways they had aligned against me. Invitations stopped coming for casual outings. Phone calls became rare. Even holidays were quietly redirected to Vanessa's family or Mark's latest venture. I was being removed, slowly, invisibly. And no one seemed to care. The breaking point started small. It began with my favorite chair in the living room. One morning, I woke to find it replaced with a modern, uncomfortable replica. Vanessa had decided it fit better with the lighting. Daniel did not even notice. Mark laughed when I pointed it out. I sat stiffly on that chair, feeling a physical ache that mirrored the emotional one inside. Every visit afterward was punctuated by her corrections, by their shared jokes at my expense. I felt trapped in my own home. And it escalated from there. I remember one evening vividly. It was a quiet Wednesday. I had spent hours preparing dinner, something I thought we would all enjoy. Vanessa arrived, looked around, and whispered just loud enough for Daniel and Mark to hear. I do not know why she even tries. This is not acceptable for guests. My mouth went dry. I felt my hands tremble as I served the food. Daniel did not look up from his plate. Mark laughed, not loudly, just enough to mock without drawing attention. I ate in silence, tasting humiliation more than the roast chicken. I began to notice how every family event had become orchestrated. Vanessa and Mark spoke in hushed tones, often just outside earshot. When I approached, they would stop abruptly, giving each other the kind of smirks that made me want to disappear. Daniel began to speak less and less. When he did, it was in agreement with them, a muted echo of whatever Vanessa suggested. I felt like I was living in a house where my existence was tolerated only if it did not inconvenience them. Even my own son had become a weapon. Daniel, who I had raised with love and patience, now parroted Vanessa's criticisms without realizing the damage. He would say things like, "Mom, you are too rigid," or "You do not need to worry about these details. We have it handled." His voice was calm, his tone gentle, but the weight behind his words was crushing. I realized that my authority, my experience, my very presence was being erased, piece by piece. And the cruelest part was the smile on their faces. They believed they were doing nothing wrong. There were moments when I tried to fight back, carefully, subtly. A comment here, a suggestion there. But every attempt was met with polite dismissal or invisible sabotage. Vanessa's control was not just over my home or my life. It was over my confidence, my voice, my identity. I felt myself shrinking. The woman I once was fading into someone quiet, cautious, hesitant. And yet, in the deepest part of me, a spark began to grow. A spark that would not allow me to be erased without a fight. One day, I overheard them laughing in the kitchen, whispering about the next lesson they would teach me. I paused outside the doorway, listening. My heart raced. They were planning something deliberate, something to remind me of my place. Daniel laughed in agreement. Mark added a joke about how oozily I was manipulated. Vanessa smirked, satisfied. My hands clenched into fists. I felt my body tense, my mind sharpening. This was no longer subtle. This was organized. And that meant one thing. It could be confronted. It could be undone. And at that moment, I knew that everything they had built, their quiet alliance, their invisible war, would not go unchallenged. Something had shifted inside me. It was no longer endurance or patience. It was resolve. And the question that consumed me for days afterward was simple. How could I turn this slow, calculated humiliation into a reckoning they would never forget? The answer would not be immediate. It would require planning, precision, timing, and above all, it would require patience, the kind I had perfected over decades of being underestimated, dismissed, and ignored. Little did they know, the game had already begun. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. I'd just returned from work, soaked through, hair plastered to my face, and I found Daniel and Vanessa in my kitchen, not casually, not as guests. They were reorganizing my cupboards, and meticulously arranged cupboards, where each plate, bowl, and cup had a place I had chosen decades ago. Vanessa held a measuring tape, aligning jars with the precision of a military drill. Daniel was jotting notes in a notebook. Mark was nowhere to be seen, but I knew he was in the shadows, probably laughing quietly somewhere. I froze. The cold rain had nothing on the chill in my chest. I did not know whether to scream, cry, or run. My hands twitched, wanting to touch something, anything, to remind myself that it belonged to me. And then I felt the anger rising slow at first, a simmering heat under my ribs, until it became a wildfire I could no longer contain. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to say, "Stop. This is my house. This is my life. This is my space." But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out, just the sound of rain against the window. I watched Vanessa straighten a spice jar and Daniel make a note about shelf height. They did not look up. They did not notice. And that, more than anything, pushed me over the edge. It was not just the cupboards. It was everything they had done over months, over years, erasing me quietly, systematically, like a pencil rubbing away the lines of a drawing. The dinners where I was ignored, the whispered jokes in the hallway, the dismissive comments from my own son, the laughter shared at my expense. I realized then that I had tolerated too much. I had smiled through humiliation. I had swallowed my pride for too long. And that would end tonight. I stood in the doorway, trembling, and felt a strange clarity wash over me. They believed they had power. They believed I was small. They believed that I would continue to endure. But endurance alone would not suffice. They needed to see the consequence. They needed to realize that disrespect carries a weight. And that weight was about to fall squarely on them. I walked to the cupboard, touched the edge of a shelf, and imagined every confrontation I had avoided. Every subtle insult, every sneer, every laugh at my expense. I pictured Vanessa smirking as she moved my dishes. I pictured Daniel nodding as if her words were gospel. And suddenly, the spark of resolve ignited into a roaring flame. I would not just speak, I would act. Every move from here on out would be deliberate, calculated, and undeniable. That night, I began to observe every pattern, every routine, every weakness. I noted the times Daniel left the house, the moments Vanessa was most distracted, Mark's reliance on his phone for amusement, the way Vanessa bristled when she felt questioned. I was not planning out of anger alone. I was planning like a strategist. Every slight, every dismissal would be recorded in my mind. Every laugh at my expense would be cataloged as fuel. Sleep became impossible. I woke in the middle of the night, heart hammering, mind racing. I could hear the rain tapping against the roof like a drumbeat of anticipation. I pictured their smug faces at the next family dinner. I pictured myself walking in, calm, composed, and entirely in control of the narrative. The idea of justice, of turning the tables, consumed me. Every ounce of humiliation I had endured transformed into meticulous energy, focused and relentless. I thought about confrontation. Direct confrontation would satisfy anger, but not the deeper need. I wanted something that would teach them a lesson that could not be ignored. Something that would leave an impression so permanent they would never forget the cost of underestimating me. I imagined the looks on their faces, the shock, the disbelief, the realization that they had misjudged me entirely. And with each imagined reaction, my resolve hardened. I began speaking to myself quietly in the mirror, rehearsing. Not what I would say, but what I would make them feel. Control, embarrassment, exposure, the feeling that comes when the person you thought was untouchable discovers they are not. I allowed myself to envision every tiny detail, the lighting, the timing, environment, the reactions. Every image sharpened my determination. I knew I had reached the point where patience alone was not enough. I was no longer willing to accept passive disrespect. I was no longer willing to tolerate subtle manipulation. I had to transform that simmering anger into precision action. And deep down, I knew the most satisfying revenge is not loud, not chaotic. It is controlled. It is cinematic. It lands exactly where it is intended. And it leaves no room for doubt about who holds the power. As the storm raged outside, I felt a quiet thrill. The breaking point was not a collapse. It was awakening. I understood my own strength. I understood that the very people who had dismissed me had miscalculated in the most fundamental way. They assumed patience equaled weakness. They assumed endurance meant silence. They assumed respect could be taken for granted. They were wrong. From that night onward, everything changed. My eyes were open, my mind was sharpened. My patience became strategy. And in the quiet of the rain-soaked house, I whispered to myself, they will see. They will feel. And when it happens, they will know that underestimation carries a price they never anticipated. The plan had begun, but the first move was still mine to make, and I was ready. I did not rush the revenge. I let it breathe. I let it mature. The best plans do not come from rage alone. They come from patience sharpened into precision. Step one was silence. I stopped reacting. I smiled more. I nodded more. I thanked Vanessa for her help. I told Daniel he was right. I laughed at Mark's jokes. And inside, something clicked into place. They mistook my calm for surrender. That mistake would cost them everything they thought they controlled. I watched. I listened. I remembered. Vanessa loved authority more than comfort. She needed to feel superior. She needed witnesses. Daniel craved approval, especially hers. Mark wanted relevance. He wanted to feel important in a room where he otherwise contributed very little. Those were not flaws. They were openings. Step 2 was documentation. Every visit, every comment, every decision made without me. I recorded quietly, dates, times, exact words. The tone Vanessa used when she spoke to me like a child. The way Daniel avoided eye contact when she overstepped. The way Mark repeated things he should not have known. I kept everything in a small leather notebook hidden inside my nightstand drawer. Writing it down grounded me. It turned emotion into evidence. Then came the opportunity. Vanessa decided we should host a family gathering, not at their place, at mine. She framed it as generosity. It will help Elaine feel included, she said, loud enough for Daniel and Mark to hear. I smiled and agreed. Inside, my pulse quickened. This was the stage I needed. Step 3 was preparation. I cleaned the house myself, slowly, methodically. I put back every item Vanessa had moved. Every dish returned to its original place. Every photograph straightened. The house felt like mine again. That mattered. Power begins with reclaiming space. I set the table beautifully. Soft lighting, candles, the good plates. Not to impress them, but to remind myself who I was. As I cooked, the smell of rosemary and garlic filled the kitchen. The sound of oil sizzling in the pan steadied my nerves. My hands did not shake. They were calm, precise. Before anyone arrived, I placed my notebook on the counter, closed, visible, not hidden. Laned. Step 4 was timing. When everyone had arrived and settled, when glasses were full and conversations overlapped, I stood. Slowly, I tapped my fork against my glass. The sound cut through the room like a blade. Silence followed. Vanessa looked annoyed. Daniel looked confused. Mark smirked, expecting a toast. I want to thank you all for coming, I said evenly. And for helping me understand something important. Vanessa tilted her head. Elaine, is this necessary right now? Yes, I said. One word. Firm. The room shifted. I opened the notebook. Step 5 was exposure. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult anyone. I read calmly, clearly, dates, quotes, decisions made without me, comments disguised as concern, laughter that followed. I described moments they thought I had forgotten. I watched their faces change as recognition set in. Vanessa crossed her arms. Daniel stared at the table. Mark shifted in his seat. Did you know, I asked Daniel softly, that your wife and your uncle discussed selling my house without telling me? Silence. Mark laughed nervously. That was a joke. No, I replied. It was not. It was written down. It's with witnesses. Vanessa opened her mouth. I raised my hand. I am not finished. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady, controlled. Step 6 was the final move. I have already spoken to a lawyer, I said. That was the first lie. But they did not know that. I have updated my will. I have changed my power of attorney. And I have documented everything that has happened in this house. Daniel looked up then. Fear flickered across his face. I raised you to be better than this, I continued. Not silent, not complicit. Vanessa stood abruptly. This is absurd. No, I said quietly. This is accountability. Step 7 was exit. I did not argue. I did not explain further. I closed the notebook. I wished them a pleasant evening. I walked to my bedroom and locked the door, leaving them alone with the weight of what they had just heard. Behind the door, my legs trembled. My breath came fast. Relief washed over me in waves, so strong I had to sit on the bed. I pressed my palm against my chest and laughed softly. Not out of joy, out of release. I had not screamed, had not begged. I had not lost control, had taken it back. And in the quiet aftermath, I knew something irreversible had happened. They would never look at me the same way again. Neither would I. The night of the payoff arrived quietly, like a storm settling before its strike. I had not rushed it. I had waited for the perfect moment when the house, the guests, and their own hubris aligned. Vanessa believed she had orchestrated everything. She had turned my home into her stage, with Daniel and Mark as her loyal audience. She never suspected I was watching, planning, anticipating every movement, every word, every reaction. The gathering began as usual. Candles flickered, their light dancing across the polished table. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed softly, and the aroma of dinner filled the air. I walked in last, calmly, deliberately, carrying a small folder that looked insignificant. But inside was everything, every insult, every plan, every subtle humiliation they had orchestrated. I placed it on the table in plain view. Vanessa's smile faltered immediately. Her hands froze mid-gesture. Daniel's fork hovered above his plate. Mark leaned back slightly, a nervous glance passing between them. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch. The pause was my weapon. Every second, their unease grew. "I want to share something," I said evenly, my voice calm, measured. "Something I think you all need to see." Vanessa rolled her eyes, clearly expecting drama. Daniel looked down at the table. Mark smirked, thinking it would be a minor annoyance. They underestimated me. They always had. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, and began revealing details. Dates, conversations, actions disguised as jokes. Plans made behind my back. Each page I laid open was a mirror reflecting their arrogance. Vanessa leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mark's smirk faltered. "Do you remember this?" asked softly, placing a note on the table. "Vanessa, this is when you decided to rearrange my entire kitchen while I was at work. You claimed it was for flow. You told Daniel it would make me feel more comfortable. Did it?" I paused. Her eyes widened slightly. She opened her mouth to respond. I waited. Silence. That pause was the first crack in their facade. I moved through the folder meticulously. I described the dinners where I had been ignored. The jokes at my expense whispered when I walked out of the room. The constant corrections. Daniel's silence when she humiliated me. Mark's laughter that followed. Each word landed like a stone, deliberate and unyielding. Vanessa's face flushed. Her perfect composure began to crumble. She crossed her arms, then dropped them, twisting her fingers nervously. Daniel's eyes widened. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Mark shifted in his chair, uncomfortable for the first time in years. I could feel their panic rising. I could hear this subtle, shallow breathing. The tension was almost physical, like static in the air. Then I revealed my final piece. "I have spoken to a lawyer. My documents are updated. Power of attorney is changed. Every decision made without me has been noted and preserved. And the next time anyone tries to erase me or make me small, they will find I am not the person they think I am." Vanessa stood abruptly. Her face was pale, lips pressed tightly together. "This is ridiculous," she said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Daniel stood as well, helpless, caught between his mother and his wife, unsure what to do. Mark tried to laugh it off. It sounded hollow. His usual bravado failed him completely. I allowed myself a slow, deliberate smile. Calm, controlled. The release was almost overwhelming. Every insult, every dismissal, every slight over the past months had built to this moment. And now, finally, the power was mine. "You thought I would never act," I said softly, letting the words hang in the air like a challenge. "You thought patience was weakness. You were wrong." Vanessa's hands trembled. She opened her mouth again, but the words were swallowed by the weight of exposure. Daniel shifted from foot to foot, uncertainty clear on his face. Mark leaned back, rubbing his forehead. The room was silent, every eye on me. I felt a rush of validation, an emotional high I had not known for months. Relief mixed with triumph. The humiliation I had endured became a distant memory, replaced by control, precision, and the undeniable clarity of justice delivered. I closed the folder. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street, the rain glistening under the lamplight. My chest rose and fell in steady, satisfying rhythm. The storm outside mirrored the one I had carried inside me for months, and now it had passed. Vanessa finally spoke, almost whispering, "Elaine, I." She stopped, unable to finish. Daniel avoided my eyes. Mark shifted in his chair, silent. I did not respond. I let them feel it. The weight of their miscalculations. The realization that every small act of arrogance, every manipulation, had consequences. That moment, suspended in quiet tension, was all the release I needed. Every tremor of fear, every flush of panic, every faltering word from them was the payoff. Finally, I turned away from the window and allowed myself a breath I had not taken in months. Relief washed through me like a tide. I felt lighter, stronger, untouchable in a way I had never felt before. The injustice that had haunted me was addressed. The disrespect that had lingered like a shadow over my life was gone. And the satisfaction, subtle but overwhelming, coursed through me in quiet waves. They would never forget this night. Not the exposure, not the humiliation, not the way the truth had been delivered slowly, precisely, and without malice. And I would never forget the moment I reclaimed my power. In that room, with the rain tapping gently on the windows, I realized something profound. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is calm, deliberate, and undeniable. They had underestimated me. I had endured. And now, finally, they understood the cost. The morning after, the house felt different, quieter, lighter. The storm outside had passed, but so had the tension I had carried inside me for months, maybe years. I moved through the room slowly, deliberately, noticing how my hands could touch surfaces without anger, without shame, without resentment. This house had always been mine, but it took a long struggle for me to feel that truth again. Every room, every corner, even the cupboard doors I had defended with strategy and precision felt like reclaimed territory. It was strange, almost surreal, to realize the extent of what had happened. Vanessa and Mark had underestimated patience and resolve. They thought endurance was weakness. They believed compliance was submission. And yet karma does not need to roar. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and inescapable. It does not matter how charming someone seems, how confident, how manipulative. Truth has a way of asserting itself, and justice, when precise, carries a weight that cannot be ignored. I thought about Daniel too, my son, my own child, who had allowed himself to be swayed by the confidence of others. Watching him during that night of exposure was revealing. He looked smaller than ever. The realization had settled in that loyalty cannot be assumed. Respect must be earned, maintained, and never taken for granted. That was a lesson I would carry forward, not as anger toward him, but as clarity for the boundaries I would now enforce. I also thought about myself and the long road it had taken to reach this point. I had tolerated disrespect. I had swallowed humiliation. I had questioned my own instincts, wondering if I was imagining slights or being overly sensitive. And yet every moment of doubt had prepared me for this moment. Patience had been my weapon, observation my strategy, and silence my shield. I had learned that power is not always loud. It is careful, deliberate, and waits for the perfect opportunity to make itself undeniable. The lessons from this experience are not simple. They are not about forgiveness or reconciliation. They are about understanding human nature and recognizing where strength lies. True strength, I discovered, is not in reaction alone. It is in planning. It is in endurance. It is in taking the energy others expend, trying to diminish you, and turning it into something precise, unstoppable, and consequential. The humiliation, the manipulation, the subtle undermining, all of it became fuel. And that fuel, when directed, can ignite transformation not just externally, but within. I reflect often on the small things. The way Vanessa would rearrange my kitchen, the jokes whispered when I left the room, Daniel's quiet agreement when she overstepped, Mark's laughter at moments I should have felt secure. Each moment, once a source of frustration and helplessness, now feels like a lesson etched into memory. They taught me about patience, about precision, about the quiet satisfaction of setting things right on your own terms. The aftermath has been revealing. Vanessa no longer treats my space as her stage. Mark has become careful with his words. Daniel seems more attentive, though I keep a measured distance. I do not need apologies. I do not crave acknowledgement. What matters is the shift in energy, the balance restored, the unspoken acknowledgement that I will not be underestimated again. That recognition alone, subtle as it may be, carries more weight than any verbal admission could. New beginnings do not come with fanfare. They arrive quietly, in the reclaimed sense of self, in the ability to move freely without fear. In the knowledge that boundaries are respected not because of charm or manipulation, but because strength and resolve demand it. I feel lighter. I feel capable. I feel, in a way, free. Freedom is not just about removing toxic influence. It is about regaining control over your space, your voice, and your narrative. I know the story is not about vengeance in a traditional sense. It is about clarity. It is about observing injustice, waiting for the precise moment, and acting in a way that is undeniable. There is satisfaction in that precision, in the knowledge that patience is more powerful than rage. The payoff when it arrives is not just for show. It is for validation, for relief, and for the unshakable understanding that control belongs to those who refuse to be diminished. As I move forward, I carry this clarity like a shield. I do not allow manipulation, disrespect, or underestimation to enter my life again. I do not forgive because there is no need. The lesson has been learned. Karma, subtle but relentless, has ensured that those who sought to diminish me now know the cost of underestimation. That alone is enough. I am no longer the quiet observer. I am deliberate. I am vigilant. I am unshakable. And in this quiet aftermath, I can finally breathe without fear, move without hesitation, and exist without apology. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button and share your own experiences in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated or disrespected? Tell us how you reclaimed your power. Subscribe for more stories that prove patience, strategy, and quiet strength can deliver the sweetest form of justice.